All right, conversational pace fans. You asked, so I'm delivering. This is the ultimate nerding out midsole episode. I have my friend Bryan Bhark here. Bryan, I would love for you to kind of introduce yourself. What do you do in the trail world? What do you do at Brooks?
Yeah, Brett, thanks for having me on. Real honor and pleasure to sit here and just chat about innovation, foams, etc. So I've been at Brooks for about 10 years. I am the senior manager of innovation product development. Been sitting on the innovation team for about the last seven. Prior to that, I was working on inline product. So inline product in the footwear world is what we consider product that has iterations. So like a Ghost or a Glycerin or Adrenaline. On the innovation side, I do a lot of foam compound development as well as manage our athlete team and get to work on a couple of projects myself that are typically quicker to market. And most of them tend to be on the trail side. So anytime we've put out a brand new shoe to market, that hasn't existed before. It's come through our team on the innovation side. And so, for example, like the Catamount Agile, the upcoming Cascadia Elite, all those came from the innovation team, and I was really fortunate to be the product developer on those models.
So, you work with foams and chemical compounds. Your like emphasis is on trail, and it's mostly new and upcoming trail. I'm pretty sure that out of the entire footwear world, I am talking to the exact right person for this episode.
I hope so. I will say, working on trail product within innovation is something that I'm incredibly passionate about, but it's also kind of a smaller percentage of my overall job. But it is by far the most fun. I manage an incredible team of developers and engineers. I get to work on kind of our future of manufacturing, our future innovation vision at Brooks, and so I do a lot of different things day to day.
A question that I think maybe you told me, or like a statement you told me at some point, but I love framing it back as a question, just to get a sense at like how far pretty much every single one of these major footwear brands is looking into the future. Like, I'm going to be going to TRE in early December. We're going to be looking at, all the 2026 lines of shoes. So then it's like most of like myself as a shoe reviewer, I'm always looking like at the current year and 1 year ahead. What year do you operate in?
If I were to categorize it by year in market, it's, I would say as early as 28, but generally 2030, 2032 timeframe playing in. But we do have a lot of product, like I mentioned, the athlete product. We do those things quite quickly. So those are more the product that's focused more near term, but they're utilizing innovation that probably won't be commercially available until several years after they've come to market in the athlete shoe.
Yeah, that's so interesting how you're thinking so many years down the line of, like
I think
what's in
I
the
think it's
crystal
funny.
ball.
Yeah, yeah. Like I go to TRE, take a look at product, and then for the first time, in some cases, I'm kind of seeing our entire inline product line up on a wall. There'll be a few of those products that we worked on as an innovation team from a component standpoint or a foam standpoint. And you have this realization like, oh, that's now just going to market? Like that felt like so 3 years ago. So it's a total time warp in terms of how we operate.
Yeah, that's super interesting and probably very confusing at times too, especially when you're bouncing around, like not only looking at 3, 4, 5 years down the road, but then being able to kind of fast track a shoe and get it out really quick. Like something like the Cascadia Elite. It seemed like the majority of that shoe came into existence in like 1 year.
Yeah,
Hmm.
we briefed the shoe October of last year,
Yeah,
and the shoe is already in production. So it's been one of our fastest shoes to date.
it's pretty cool. Like fastest shoe to date for multiple reasons.
Yeah.
So, okay, we got to start diving into some midsole foam talk. I guess I don't know if your definition, Brooks's definition, but like what defines a super foam?
Generally speaking, I think a super foam has a unique combination of attributes, and a unique combination of attributes that weren't currently achievable, prior to maybe 10 years ago. But I'd say they're typically really low density, so they're very light. They have incredible displacement, so they're very high cushion. And I think most importantly for people who are running in super foam shoes, they have really high energy return. So you have this incredible combination of weight, energy return, and cushioning that deliver that really bouncy experience, that really propulsive experience. So I would
Okay.
say, for all intents and purposes, that's kind of how we define a super foam.
And then I guess the ultimate goal for that foam is to help you run faster.
Exactly. Yep.
Okay. Um,
Efficiency.
efficiency, which originated on the roads, which eliminates a lot of variables.
It
Because
does. Yep. Road running is very
flat,
linear. So,
yeah. It feels like, I mean, I know that the equation of like making shoes as fast as they can be is, you know, that'll never be a book that we close. But at the moment, it seems like many of the major shoe brands have kind of quote unquote figured out like a super shoe for, let's say, a road marathon. Um, Trail, though, it seems like a totally different story because if we're looking at like, Brooks, Hyperion Elite, like Nike, Vaporfly or Alphafly, Puma, Fast R3. I mean, I could name all the road super shoes. They look a lot different, but they're all kind of the same. It's like they all have a plate. They're all carbon. They all have a very low density, very bouncy foam. They're all super lightweight. They're all bouncy. Um, that company's respective like trail super shoe though, they're all super different. I'm curious from like Brooks' standpoint, like what have been some of your learnings about these foams and how their attributes differ on the road versus trail?
stating the obvious first, just kind of the stark differences between road racing and trail racing. Trail racing comes in so many different forms. It's so multidimensional. The movement is much more complex. Road running is very linear, and so you have essentially a classification of shoes that all have the same general composition. In trail running, though, I think we have to look at it a little bit more deeply in terms of what sort of benefit we're trying to um, uh, bring out of the shoe, what sort of consumer or what the type of runner we're really trying to address, and what terrain they're primarily running on. Primarily meaning we always would like a level of versatility to our shoes because, to survive as a business, you have to make shoes commercially viable. But when we're focused purely on kind of tip of the spear, we can be a bit more specific and much more targeted in terms of the application of the shoe. And so we're considering terrain type, we're considering um, all of the runner insights we get from our athletes. We're considering the materials that kind of go into making a shoe come to life, and then really the construction of those materials and how they come together.
Can we apply some of what you just said to the Cascadia Elite?
Totally.
Because I know that's
Yeah.
kind of like the tip of the spear. There was some cool testing that went around, and like it didn't seem like a it didn't seem like a guessing game in terms of the material choices. It seemed like very thought out, and it's like this material is on the shoe for this reason. And Finn and I, we just published our review of the Cascade Elite, and like we have our kind of interpretation of why we think everything's there. But it'd be interesting to hear from your standpoint, like how essentially you guys built that trail super shoe.
Yeah, I feel like your guys' description and interpretation was pretty spot on. You guys did a great
Cool.
job.
All
Yeah,
right.
like honestly, couldn't have said it better myself in terms of how you described how all the pieces come together in that shoe, what the plate is doing, how the sole unit or the tooling has been designed. But I would say, in my own words, uh, the goal of the Cascadia Elite was to create Brooks's pinnacle ultra distance trail racing shoe. The focus of that shoe is UTMB, um, taking into consideration the fact that UTMB is a longer 100-mile race. So uh, elites are still spending, north of 20 hours in the shoes in most cases. Um, the type of terrain is quite variable. You are power hiking parts of the course, even at the tip of the spear of competition. Um, and so when we started looking at how we build a shoe that's really optimized for that course, yet can still be worn and raced at the highest level in a Western States. And I think we all know Chris Myers got second this year at Western States, racing in just that single pair of Cascadia Elites from start to finish. Um, so it kind of proved that versatility. But going back to how we thought about the shoe, first and foremost, it has to be something that can manage many types of terrain, all the types of terrain you would experience at UTMB, everything from paved road sections to gravel roads to steep climbs to technical descents to power hiking. We know that some trail super shoes become unstable when you're hiking in them, or
Hmm.
they become unstable, or the lack of stability affects your performance on technical terrain or when you start to fatigue. So those were all considerations we took into how we build kind of the template of the shoe. So it has quite a broad base in the midfoot, or sorry, the forefoot, midfoot, and heel. And that was really intentional. So it has this almost like pyramid kind of structure to it, to provide a really stable base of support. And it aligns with our point of view in biomechanics and how we believe people run. Um, we know that we were going to use a pinnacle foam because we wanted to, get all the benefits of a super foam. So, you know, super lightweight, high energy return, high cushion. But we needed a plate to help stabilize that super foam. And you mentioned the original Brooks guide rail system. That was
Yeah.
exactly what I had talked about to the team when I kind of hand sketched an idea of the plate, and I said, "Hey, I think this is going to help like cradle your foot. It delivers on kind of the same premise as a guide rail, where it's going to kind of nudge your foot towards the center of the platform,
Hmm.
um, especially as you get on off-camber terrain. It's going to help to stabilize the perimeter of the shoe and allow you to get the most of the foam from directly underneath your foot." And going as thick as we did, just under 40 millimeters in the heel, don't need a rock plate. It was like 33 or 34 millimeters in the forefoot. Don't need a rock plate. I think we wanted to enable a level of ground feel that um, allows you to have the most amount of proprioception in a shoe with that kind of stack.
Hmm.
And so those were the considerations that went into the midsole and the plate. We had an amazing opportunity to partner with Vibram for the first time. Um, and they had told us they were just launching a new rubber compound, the Mega Grip Elite, which was their pure trail racing rubber compound. And so we knew that was definitely the compound to start with. And really, that compound is pretty soft. It's super sticky. So we really had to take into consideration how we design the lugs, how
Hmm.
we design the lugs with that platform. Um, we also incorporated the light based technology. And so when we're looking at how this whole system comes together, in order to save weight, in most traditional cases, you need to take away a lot of rubber because that is the heaviest part of any shoe. That can cause you to compromise your foam. All of these lower density foams have a limit with durability. They're easy to tear. Bonding can sometimes not be super great, and so we knew that approaching the shoe or the outsole design with a combination of an optimized lug geometry that's going to work across a variety of surfaces, especially the ones you're going to encounter most at UTMB. Leveraging light base, allowing us to get away with about 30% less rubber weight by reducing the base web thickness of the rubber, but being able to go full coverage enables us to not have to compromise durability underfoot. So those were kind of the major considerations. You always want a shoe to feel balanced, both in hand and on foot. And if you have a super light upper with a super light midsole and a really heavy outsole, you're going to feel that shoe is quite bottom heavy. So with the Mega Grip Elite, with the light base technology, it allowed us to have a really balanced feel, outsole to midsole to upper. And then the upper, it was kind of again, like no shortcuts. One to work with the best, the most well-known textile company that delivers premium, woven textiles, especially in the trail space. So Matrix was it. So we worked with them to create a unique pattern of their material that optimized, abrasion resistance, lightweight, breathability, drainability, those sort of things, and placed the Kevlar yarns kind of strategically.
So you talked about some of the durability issues that some of these super foams have come up with, which we've noticed at times through some of our testing, where it's like, poke holes in it, essentially. You're like, Finn's really good at delaminating outsoles. Are those some of the biggest limiting factors when like thinking about durability of these midsole foams, or have you guys found that is there a sweet spot for density that's different than the roads?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I think we'd always like to get as light as possible while ensuring the shoe feels balanced enough to perform in the terrain that it's intended to perform. As midsole foams get lighter and lighter and lighter, inherently durability becomes a bigger problem. But we look at durability kind of through two lenses. There's like physical durability. So like the foam tearing or the foam being prone to punctures, the foam abrading. And then there's like more or less like chemical durability. So the foam packing out over time. Generally speaking, as foams get lighter, they pack out faster than traditional foams. Although maybe in some cases not as fast as people might think. I think there's a perception in some cases that PEBA degrades really fast, and maybe you can model that in a lab, but then anecdotally what you hear from runners who've put 300 to 500 plus miles on, say, a pair of Cascadia Elites and then put on a new pair, they don't even notice much of a difference. And then we've done some before and after mechanical testing to actually show that. So I think, it definitely comes down to the construction of the shoe and the specific formulations of the foam compounds. But in general, yes, durability is a big concern that I think every brand who is creating shoes in this space needs to account for.
Yeah, and I've noticed that on the roads, it's like, before you could kind of take a lot of road shoes, even road racing shoes. I mean, people were winning ultras in like the Adidas Adios. That was like the staple ultra racing shoe. But now it's like, I'm never taking like an A6 Metaspeed Ray and throwing it on for Western states. Like,
right.
That's probably the dumbest thing ever. And yeah, and it just comes down kind of like to more like every single shoe seems to be getting more and more specific. One thing that I thought was interesting, and the Running Warehouse podcast was Mr. Rubio used to run. That's what it's called.
Yes.
They actually just did an amazing midsole episode, which like I didn't copy you guys, just for the record. Like go listen to it. I'm like I had my own lane of midsole episode questions all carved out, but I learned some really cool things. One of the bits that I wanted to kind of talk to you about was how basically it was EVA from like 1970
Mhm.
through 2013 when Adidas Boost came out. And now it seems like every single brand is trying to market their new foam, and they're not even all the same materials. I mean, every brand was trying to market their own recipe of EVA, but like at the end of the day, it was all EVA. There's actually a lot of different like chemical compounds that are turning into super foams now, and I would love your help, like getting a little bit of a definition on like each one, maybe briefly, like maybe how they're made or how they might differ. Yeah, let's just start there.
Sounds
so,
good. Yep.
so probably one of the most popular ones that we've seen is PEBA, and
hmm
that's what Brooks uses in their super shoes.
So
What do you?
PEBA,
Yeah.
yeah, it stands for polyether block amide. Um, there is a brand of PEBA called PBAX, and that's a specific. It's PEBA basically from the chemical company Arkema. Uh, it can also be foamed, but you typically see something like PBAX in a plate because the base polymer comes from Arkema. PEBA is, probably one of the most expensive polymers out there. It performs incredibly well. You can foam it to really low densities, and I'll say, I think all of these polymers, the general process without getting into too much detail is via some type of supercritical foaming process. Every brand, every midsole vendor kind of has their unique spin on it,
Mhm.
but all of them are kind of foamed through a supercritical process. So PEBA, um, like I said, is one of the has been one of the more legacy super foams because it performs so well. I think its biggest downside is its price. It is very expensive.
Is that why we're seeing other other acronymed foams out there, or are there reasons beyond that? Like an example, like I feel like we're seeing like a TPU has been one that I've seen thrown around a couple times across a couple different brands.
Yeah. Price is certainly a consideration. So material availability. That's something that definitely comes to top of mind for any sort of brand. And I think as you see brands move into the space with TPUs or ATPUs, TPEs, and other kind of unique polymers, um, there are kind of nuanced benefits that
Mm-hmm.
you can extract from those specific polymers. There are scalability benefits. So, for example, you can blend PEBA with EVA, but you
Mm-hmm.
might be limited to a certain percentage based on compatibility of the materials. You can you can have various grades of TPU, you can have various grades of TPEE, and you can foam it to different densities, different hardnesses. But when we're talking about tip of the spear, almost all of those polymers are getting to there isn't one polymer in particular that is foamed significantly lighter than the others. And let's
Okay.
just say, as an example, if we're foaming a super foam polymer like ATPU or PEBA to like zero point zero 0.07 grams per cubic centimeter, and then you have another foam that's 0.06,
Mm-hmm.
that's like a couple grams. That's like not
Okay.
really. So, what other benefits are you getting out of that? Is it a different sensation of bounce? Is it a different way that the material displaces? Is it durability? So, those are all
Mm.
considerations that brands take, that we take when we're actually looking at different polymers. Also, I mentioned scalability. I can't overemphasize that because, you know, when it comes to the bottom line, if you're building performance race day shoes, those don't generally make a lot of money for a brand.
Yeah.
They deliver for the athlete, and they are great at serving as kind of a halo product for the brand.
Okay.
But you will always get asked questions like, "Hey, is there an ability to scale this into more mass market shoes?" And so what that probably means is you want to, foam the material in a way where it's a little bit more durable. It doesn't have to be as light. Um, as a result, energy return goes down, cushioning goes down a little bit, but you can make up for a lot of that through geometry. So
Okay.
um, there's a lot there.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
And I'm sure, I'm sure Brooks is not only, yes, you're making your road shoe, your road super shoe and your Cascadia Elite out of PEBA, but I'm sure that's not the only material that you have experimented or played around with.
Nope. We've
No,
played
yeah.
around with all of them. Yeah.
Yeah.
And we continue to play around with all of them.
Yeah. So it's kind of probably like a moving, I don't know what's like the right answer is always changing
Right.
depending on what you learn. Um,
Exactly.
that's interesting. You brought up kind of like one of the biggest reasons, like even though maybe like stats wise, a lot of the foams, they're very similar. But you said that they all kind of have just like a different flavor. That might just come down to like a brand and like the Bryan Bharks of Asics, of Nike, of New Balance, just being like you and your team over there has come to liking like a Coke versus Pepsi sort of thing.
Exactly.
Like, which flavor of Doritos do you like? It's
Right.
kind of like that, where it's just maybe not even purposefully differentiating themselves from another brand, but like that's just how the like brand identity is shifted or influenced the decision of some of these foams.
Yes. Yeah, I'd say that is 100% correct. There's definitely a certain sort of feel that we're trying to go for.
Okay.
A feel, ride, and experience. At the tip of the spear with our athletes, I think they're really the ones driving what that feel and ride expectation is. And so, you know, we may build a Cascadia Elite or a Hyperion Elite in 4 or 5 different foam compounds, all kind of in that same super foam realm, and then blind test our athletes, ask them what they prefer, really dig deep in terms of why they prefer one over the other, and then use that to really help drive decisions forward. I think for the athlete, we're never going to say, you can't have this because it's too expensive or we can't scale it. For the athlete, we are going to do it.
Hmm.
It's awesome if it works out that the material they like the best, that creates the best experience for them, is also a material that has some scaling capability. But it's not a requirement. It's a nice to have. And that's why I kind of alluded to earlier, like these polymers have the ability to really take on many different forms depending on, the grade of the polymer, the supplier, the process. And so you can take essentially the same thing and create a tip of the spear version and then something that's more commercial.
So you don't have to like lay out any specifics, but like where do the foams, or maybe where do you see the foams going from here? Because like at the moment, it seems like I guess I keep going back to the roads, and it's like
Mm-hmm.
it always starts on the roads first, and it trickles to trail. But it's like the foams are like who can be the who can have the highest energy return, who can be the lightest. It seems like in the last like 3 4 years ago, it was all about energy return.
Mm-hmm.
Now we're combining the lighter weight because it's in the last year it seems like a lot of the shoes that now have like their hyper premium, the $500 version that's
Yeah.
4 ounces. There's only so much energy you can return.
Yep.
There's only so light you can get. So then, like, what's next? Like, where did the foam? Where can they go from here?
Yeah. I won't
Yeah.
disclose too much about where we see foams going from there specifically. What I will say though is you start to look at the athlete more holistically. more holistically in the sense of what are all the things we can do to really optimize the performance of this particular athlete, these group of athletes, and where does footwear play a role in that? How does footwear play a role in that? And so if that was for trail, what sort like let's take Chris Myers. How does he run?
There's no rules in trail.
Right,
That's the
exactly.
other
There's no
thing.
rules in trails in trail. So, we might consider how he runs, how he likes to run, the types of terrain he tends to favor, or the types of terrain he's going to be racing in. Look at his biomechanics, understand how he fatigues, understand his nutritional requirements, his hydration requirements. All of those things we actually take into consideration and figure out a way to build product that is complementary to that. And so
Hmm.
I think it's about getting more specific to an individual athlete's needs with these incredible tools that you have.
Okay, so that I guess that's something that only applies to the athletes that are running for Brooks. But I guess there could be things that you then discover and learn based off of that can come to
Exactly.
mass
Yeah, I
market.
think, and that's the hope, right? Similar to the principle of commercial commercializing a foam compound, we're trying to understand the larger takeaways of the mechanisms behind what makes a certain combination of materials or maybe a certain plate geometry really work for this one athlete or this group of athletes. And so what does that mean in terms of how it can apply, more broadly, to like a Cascadia or, a glycerin on the roadside. So
Hmm.
those are definitely things that we hope to scale internally as well.
So that actually just got me thinking. So it's like, well, let's build Chris Myers the ultimate Western States shoe for him for 2026. A big problem with traditional EVA is
Mm-hmm.
that it changes a huge amount depending on the temperature.
Yep.
Um, how do these super foams do with changing temperatures?
Yeah, it really depends on the specific polymer. I would say in general, like TPUs, and even PEBA to an extent, despite the lower density, are a little bit more resistant to temperature changes. But none of these foams are, um, you know, escape the laws of physics. They will always generally feel a little bit harder when it's colder and a little bit softer when it's warmer. Um, there's a lot more work going into the chemistry side to figure out how to make them a little bit more neutral
Mm,
across varying temperature ranges. Kind of like rubber compounds, right? A snow tire has
right.
a softer rubber compound that doesn't get hard in really cold temperatures, and they do that through a variety of chemical additives. So, looking at some of those things to figure out how to make these foams as consistent as possible, regardless of the condition.
I guess the other I guess large equation with the consistency piece is making the shoes feel good at mile 80 or
Yep.
mile 90, which is probably an equation or a problem that's been very unique to you and what you do versus many of these foams originated around 26.2 miles and not a step further.
Yeah.
So it's like, yeah, we got to make sure it feels good at mile 1, we got to make sure it feels good at mile 20, 25. Probably weren't really thinking too much when those were getting developed about like, what about after 12 hours? How do you guys look at that for trail? Because I mean, you clearly are thinking about it now.
Yeah, and I think every brand in this space is having those same conversations because they want the shoe to feel consistent and fun from mile 0 to mile 100. And that's a very unique challenge. I think it's still common for people even racing at the front of the pack to change shoes midway. We were super excited to see that Chris raced in a single pair. I mean, you raced in a single pair for
Mm-hmm.
Pine the Palm,
Yep.
not a single, didn't have to touch your shoes once. That's the hope, right? Because I think time is lost at aid stations, especially if you're trying to switch shoes. And so, really diving deep onto the into the chemistry side of figuring out how to create a foam that is so resilient, yet still meets all of those physical property requirements from a performance standpoint is really challenging. But it's certainly an area that we're exploring. And we also think that that provides equal benefit on the road side.
Mm-hmm.
Obviously, a marathon is a lot more intense. And so we got to look at how a shoe behaves, in the first 20 miles versus maybe the last 6.2 miles. And maybe that's quite similar to how a shoe behaves for the first 80 miles versus the last 20 miles. So we
Hmm.
can apply those learnings hopefully back and forth.
And I guess the like the foam, maybe even the full chemical structure, like the material you use, could differ for even someone like, again, we're just going back to Chris. We're just using Chris. Chris racing a marathon, if he's running 5 minute pace, the amount of force that he's applying versus Western states 8 minute pace. I guess in a future world, or if like Chris is getting like fully custom race day shoes, is it possible that he could have like a completely different foam compound depending on the actual pace that he's hitting for the race?
Yep, his pace would equate to some impact force, some pressure distribution based on his biomechanics. We would certainly try to optimize that through a combination of materials, so the compound, as well as the geometry. I think the
Mm-hmm.
geometry is something that people don't appreciate quite as much as the polymer side of things, because that creates a massive difference in how something can feel and ride underfoot, but then how something can deteriorate over a period of 100 miles. But
Mm-hmm.
you can create materials that are optimized for a certain type of impact or perform a certain way um, over various loads. So, yeah, without getting into too many details, yeah, that's
Yeah.
definitely an area that we've considered, we are
Yeah.
considering.
Because that's not, I mean, that's something we see in many other sports. Like you look at
Mhm.
F1, like if there's rain in
Yes.
the forecast, we're changing out the tires, we're changing many of the different things about the car to make it work for these different speeds, these different course conditions. You see it in cycling for
Yep.
like literally every single stage of the Tour de France. Like their bike is a little bit different
Mhm.
for every single stage. That's super interesting to think that we could potentially be seeing that, you know, on the professional level for footwear. I have a couple questions that I'm curious about your answers on and
Cool.
what kind of answers you can give. So I think this is actually a Patreon question. So shouts to
Oh,
the conversational pace Patreon for this.
awesome.
Um, DNA tuned
Mhm.
is it's like basically multi density midsole foam. Is that kind of how it works?
Multi-cell size.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
So it's like
Density is
softer,
generally uniform. Yeah.
so softer in the heel, but firmer in the forefoot, without, while all still being one piece of foam.
Yep. Yeah. We're essentially tuning the experience through the cell size of the foam, and so uh, we can determine where we'd want small cells versus large cells to be based on its unique physical properties.
So do you see a world where that sort of application makes sense in a trail shoe? And is it possible to incorporate DNA tuned into a super foam?
Yeah, the concept of tuning is something that we think about with all of our foams because it's very much rooted in, our heritage as a brand. We've used a DNA additive that creates this non-Newtonian response. So it essentially delivers the same amount of feedback or cushioning regardless of the impact forces. That starts to evolve when you get into the supercritical foam space. This was something really prolific when we were working with Biomogo. Um,
Good old
um,
Brooks Axiom. Dude, I put like
Hydroflow.
1,000 miles on a pair in high
Oh
school.
no.
Yeah.
Yeah. So the concept of tuning or just DNA in general is something that we consider for all our foams, even super foams. So I won't say no, um, but it's certainly an innovation that is and will take some time. Um, you can probably expect to see some of our larger franchise trail shoes, come out with some level of tuning, whether that's integrating DNA tuned as a compound, which is currently in the glycerin, or some future version of that.
Apologies for the loud hammering. They're just
Oh,
like, there's a
oh,
construction
good.
crew right outside my house just taking a hammer to my wall right now.
Nice.
Do you see a scenario where a brand would use two different kinds of super foams in one shoe? Like, like with the Cascadia Elite, it's 2 layers of DNA gold. Like, could there be any benefit to having like one of them being a TPU and another being a PEBA?
Oh, 100%. Yeah, I think like maybe you want to create a more supportive platform, as like your bottom stack, for example. So let's just say hypothetically you use like PEBA and you're like, hey, I'm going to get it down to this density and it's going to be slightly higher density than the ATPU I'm going to use on my top stack. It's going to feel a little bit softer, a little bit more plush, but it's going to help to create a bit more of a stable platform in general. You can certainly mix and match, and this is kind of goes back to what I was saying around the specific nuance around the different physical properties when you start to spend some time with how you foam it, what density or hardness you foam them to, because you can certainly extract some unique physical properties that way. And so layering the foams, I think, is going to be something that is a tool that, I think you start to see it, or brands are doing this in some cases on the road side, definitely, and a little bit on the trail side. But layering foams of different physical properties go back, many, many, many years, so decades, and so that same notion carries forward. I would say the biggest downside when you layer foams, and you tend to have to do this when you're using like a plate in the middle or something like that, is you're adding a glue layer, and that glue layer adds a level of stiffness and rigidity that you could do without. That maybe through a plate create a more precise level of tuning of stiffness and rigidity. Um, and that's why we're actually really invested in kind of our proprietary kind of DNA tune technology, because we can foam unique cell sizes without the need for any sort of glue layer. And so taking that thinking to the super foam world could be really unique.
Are you allowed to speak on why Brooks was so late to the game, putting a super foam in the road racing shoes?
Guilty as charged. Now, I think to be very honest about it, our priority has always been on delivering the best foam compound to the largest uh, population of runners. We want to serve all who run. And so we really needed to figure out how to build supercritical foams in a way that's scalable mass market. Um, the Hyperion Tempo, the first one, the Catamount, and the Aurora BL were kind of the first shoes that we built, back in, we started working on them in 2018 and maybe a little bit before, kind of that era, pre-COVID era. Um, and those were ways where we started to really figure out the benefits of supercritical foaming. And we experimented a little bit with how to put that in like a Hyperion Elite. We knew it wasn't tip of the spear, but we knew that supercritical foaming with the specific compounds we were working with offered this really unique benefit to so many runners. And so a lot of our focus went to that. I think we also took our time to develop DNA Gold, which is the foam that's used in the Hyperion Elite today, as well as the Cascadia Elite, because we really wanted to work with a vendor that was extremely experienced in how they brought their process to life and work with the highest quality PEBA out there. Um, it's a really hard material to process. It's really difficult. And as I mentioned, it's also quite expensive. And it has a lot of compromises from a durability standpoint. So those were things we were working through and considering along the journey, so that we could bring to market the best execution of PEBA that we felt was right for our consumers, our athletes. I will say, going back several years, our road athletes were running in versions of DNA Gold. It just looked like everything else at the time. But we were getting their feedback, and it was really helping to shape how we develop the compound going forward.
Okay, that's a good answer. I was I was curious what was going to come of that. I guess one of my last questions I had for you, and I don't know, this is maybe I don't know if this is a plead the fifth or not question, but are you able to talk about any of the studies that you did when kind of developing the Cascadia Elite?
So I guess I'll talk to some of the field testing that we did, because it's actually pretty cool, and I think it's a really good way to understand the unique needs that trail runners have, especially trail athletes have at the front of the pack. Um, we did tests. We did a research study using IMUs, essentially sensors that detect motion in every plane. Um, we were able to put these IMUs on early prototypes of the Cascadia Elite, on existing shoes, and also couple that with perception data. So, you know, there's been so much work done around the perception of comfort and confidence. And so if you're able to kind of link specific metrics, definitive quantitative metrics that come through an IMU in terms of how your foot's moving, how it's not moving, um, and link that with perceptual data, you win. Because now what the runner is saying they experience is consistent with what the shoe is doing. There's no placebo effect. And so we did a lot of that testing early on, especially with our European athletes, to really help shape and drive um, where the Cascadia Elite goes. And um, what's interesting is that, as you mentioned in your review, Cascadia Elite, yeah, you were running in an earlier proto of the shoe. And that was happening alongside the testing that our European athletes and some of our US athletes were doing. Um, and I guess not surprisingly, the perceptual feedback was very similar between what they were saying and you were saying. So I think that was great confirmation that um, that the direction we needed to take in the following round was really concise and consistent with what athletes were saying and what we were seeing through the data. And so there are a number of other studies that we referenced that were done by external uh, companies or universities that help inform what could work in a trail super shoe versus not. Stiffness, flexibility, you definitely called that out in your review. It was intentional to not make the forefoot overly stiff. A super stiff forefoot is going to essentially require your body to input more power into the shoe to flex it, especially as you're climbing, which means more energy. And so that was really deliberate in terms of how we designed the plate, how we designed the geometry in the forefoot, as well as where the lugs were placed specifically in the forefoot region.
Hmm. Oh, yeah, that's interesting too. Like lug placement that can change
Yep.
the
Yep.
entire way the shoe feels. Man, that was a lot. My brain is absolutely spinning right now. Um, I think we might have to do one of these like every year
Happy to.
as things change. I feel like we covered a lot of ground. But as always, let us know in the comments if there's anything that we missed. I'm happy to shoot Bryan a text and be like, "What about this? What about that?" I feel like we kind of know what's coming up, from Brooks right now. I'm sure there's lots that is on deck that you know about, but I'm not going to ask you about because
Appreciate it.
because we know the answer to that. Yeah. Yeah, we like stay tuned.
Stay
Maybe
tuned.
that's an Easter egg right there.
Yeah. Yeah,
But
there's a lot of stuff that we're cooking up, playing with. I think that we really like to fail fast so that we learn. But it's an exciting time right now. not just in foam compounds, but the application of the foam compounds, different technologies that we use to optimize performance, whether that's AI or simulation. Those are all things that we're considering and utilizing. So,
Very cool. Well, thanks again, Bryan.
Brett, it's been a pleasure. Super fun to chat about foams, shoes, geek out on all this stuff. I appreciate the time.